Hi, welcome to my Parsha Shir. Thank you so much to my dear friends, Stuart and Fran Miller, for sponsoring today's Parsha Shir in memory of Stuart's mother, Rita Miller, Rivka Bas Yisrael Moshe Alevi Oleh Sholem, whose yahrzeit is on the 21st of Iyar. May our neshama have an aliyah. May we all be zeicha to see Tchias HaMesim. According to conservative political commentator and writer Kevin D. Williamson, cities don't die until they do. He was talking about Detroit. The story of Detroit is, frankly, wild. If someone had stood in downtown Detroit in the 1920s or 30s and said, "This place will one day be a dystopian wasteland," they'd have been laughed out of the room. Detroit was the shining example of American industrial prowess and economic success. Motor City, Motown, the home of innovation, a booming economy, a thriving middle class, magnificent architecture, schools, libraries, theatres, and thriving businesses. And then collapse. Whole neighbourhoods were gutted. Entire skyscrapers abandoned. Detroit didn't just decline, it imploded. Eventually, in 2013, the city went bankrupt, in the red for $20 billion. So, what happened? The answer is, people happened. Detroit's middle class moved out, and those who replaced them had no connection to the city's soul. The buildings were still there, but the spirit was gone. Civic pride evaporated. What remained was crime, corruption, and decay. I saw something similar with my own eyes in downtown Johannesburg, South Africa, around the year 2000. Towering skyscrapers abandoned, office blocks that had once been home to major businesses and law firms shuttered and empty. Windows were broken or boarded up. Homeless encampments lined the sidewalks, huddled against what used to be symbols of progress and wealth. Once vibrant spaces now stood silent and eerie, haunted by the ghosts of what they used to be. I'll never forget it. And it's not just cities. The Dust Bowl in Oklahoma had once been the most fertile land in America. It fed millions, but when the land was overused, disrespected, and abused, it rebelled. It stopped yielding crops. The wind took the topsoil and left only useless dust and the fading memory of a golden past. The point I'm making is this. Human environments, cities, land, even entire nations are not passive backdrops to our lives. They are mirrors. They reflect our values. They rise when we rise, and they fall when we fall. It really is as simple as that. And nowhere is this truth more vivid, more spiritually charged than in the land of Israel. In Parshat Bechukotai, the Torah lays out a stark and startling truth. As God's chosen people, we live in a covenant, not just with God, but with the land itself. Eretz Yisrael is no ordinary territory. It is spiritually attuned, calibrated to respond to the moral and spiritual condition of those who dwell upon it. The blessings and the curses aren't just theoretical, they are built into the very soil. We're used to thinking of land in physical terms: dirt, geology, rain, climate, crop yield, natural resources, economics. That's how people always speak about land, in purely material terms. But the Torah is telling us in Bechukotai that Eretz Yisrael isn't like other lands. It's not a piece of real estate that happens to have religious significance. It's something much more. It's something alive. Eretz Yisrael is actually an active participant in the covenant. It listens, it watches, it reacts. The Pasuk tells us, "V'nosna ha'aretz yivula, v'eitz hasoda yitein piriyoi." The land will yield its produce, and the trees of the field will give their fruit. At first glance, it sounds like a simple formula. Follow the commandments, and the land will yield bountiful crops. Behave, and you will be rewarded agriculturally. But if that's all the Torah meant, it could have said it much more succinctly. The deeper truth is that this land doesn't only respond to rain or irrigation, it also responds to mitzvahs. The Ramban draws a clear line in the sand in several places, especially in his commentary on this parsha and on Vayikra Perek Yud Ches. He explains that Eretz Yisrael operates under a completely different set of spiritual rules from the rest of the world. Other lands, he says, are governed by intermediary forces, celestial representatives, the so-called sarim, but not this one. Eretz Yisrael is under the direct, constant supervision of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. It is his land, and when people live on it in alignment with God's will, the land welcomes them. But when they betray that covenant, the land itself rebels. The Ramban famously cites the phrase, Vatoki ha'aretz es yosheveha. The land vomited out its inhabitants. According to the Ramban, this posuk isn't poetic or lyrical. On the contrary, it's literal. Like a body rejecting something toxic, the land physically cannot tolerate sin or sinners. Idolatry, immorality, corruption, the soil itself begins to convulse in response. In Golus, you could sin and kind of go unnoticed. The land doesn't care, but in Eretz Yisrael, the land does care. It notices, it reacts, and it keeps score. Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch, writing in the 19th century in Frankfurt, offers a strikingly similar view, though from a completely different direction. Rav Hirsch was not a mystic. He didn't use Kabbalistic terms or cosmic frameworks, but he saw the same phenomenon through the lens of moral consequence. For Rav Hirsch, the land of Israel is a kind of spiritual mirror. It reflects the collective inner life of its people. When a society lives with justice, with compassion, with Torah, then the land responds. But when that inner condition deteriorates, when selfishness and corruption replace faith and purpose, the outer world begins to decay as well. Crops fail, peace evaporates, anxiety grows, the very health of our environment suffers, and the ground beneath our feet begins to erode. Rav Hirsch insists this is not some kind of magical punishment system, not some kind of Harry Potter wizardry or Hollywood drama. It is straightforward cause and effect. The blessings and curses are not supernatural tricks. They are the natural consequences of spiritual and moral health, or the lack of it. The land is not a passive setting for our story, a backdrop. No, no, and no. Eretz Yisrael is a character in the story, a leading actor. It testifies, it warns, and it tells the truth. Now you might hear all that and say, fine, powerful ideas, but is anyone actually saying that the land itself reacts to mitzvahs? Is there anyone who believes that the physical world responds to the spiritual behavior of Klal Yisrael? Like, really? But the answer is yes. As the Sfas Emes tells us, the Sfas Emes reads this parsha and doesn't just see material consequence, but mystical cause. He writes that the mitzvahs we perform don't just refine our souls, they literally activate the land, almost like fertilizer that you put on the soil to make the crop yield better. The koyach, the hidden potential of Eretz Yisrael, is unlocked through mitzvah observance. The blessings that the land can offer, rainfall, fruit, security, abundance, they already exist in potential, but that potential is buried. It's waiting to be awakened, to be stimulated by the spiritual activity of the people who live on it. According to the Sfas Emes, when a Jew learns Torah, when a Jew davens, when a Jew gives tzedakah, charity, or keeps Shabbat, something stirs in the soil of Eretz Yisrael. It's incredible. When the Jewish people is aligned with its mission, the land responds with bounty. And when we drift from that mission, when mitzvahs are neglected, when Torah is forgotten, when we grow indifferent to the spirituality of the land, guess what? The land closes up. It becomes dormant. The blessing goes underground, waiting for someone to wake it up. The Sfas Emes says something even more astonishing. He says that in Eretz Yisrael, even the Gashmias is Ruchnias. The fruit, the rain, the economy, they're not physical realities. They are expressions of spiritual activity. And when that spiritual activity is weak, the gashmias, the physical material, dries up as well. It's all connected. It's such an unbelievable idea. And this brings us to another Hasidic voice, the voice of the Kedushas Levi, of Levi Yitzchak Berdichev. His approach is slightly different. It's not about land, it's about people. And it's just as important. Rav Levi Yitzchak opens his commentary on Bechukotai by asking a very simple question. Why all the language in the opening pasuk in Bechukotai Teilechu, Ves Mitzvosai Tishmeru, Vasisem Oisam? Why not just say, if you keep my commandments, you'll be blessed? Why this long-winded back and forth? His answer is so elegant. Bechukotai Teilechu doesn't mean if you keep my statutes. It means if you walk in them. Teilechu. The Kedushas Levi says that a true tzaddik, or at least someone who wants to reach the status of a true tzaddik, such a person is never standing still. Teilechu. A tzaddik is a mahalach, a spiritual traveler, always moving forward. When a person does one mitzvah sincerely, without any ulterior motives, they become elevated. They reach a new level. And from that new level, they are drawn to do another mitzvah, from one to the next, and then to the next, and so on. That's what Chazal mean when they say, mitzvah gereres mitzvah. One commandment pulls the next one in its wake. Then he brings the famous line from Maseches Kiddushin, Machshava tova, HaKadosh Baruch Hu metzaref lema'aseh. When someone thinks sincerely about doing a mitzvah, but can't carry it out for some reason, Hashem still credits it as if they did the mitzvah. We shorten this idea to a two-word phrase, Machshava k'maaseh. Your thought can be as if you did it. And that's what Ves Mitzvosai Tishmeru means. Even if you only guard them in your mind, even if it's only in the planning stages, that's already valuable. And Va'asisem Oisam, I will consider it as if you actually did them. And then the Kedushas Levi gets to the brachas. V'nosati gishmeichem be'itam. I will give you rain in its time. But wait, isn't all the reward for mitzvahs reserved for the next world, for Olam Haba? Don't Chazal say, Schar mitzvah b'hai al maleka, that there is no reward in this world for mitzvahs? The Kedushas Levi explains that rain is not actually a reward per se. It's a means. Rain brings crops. Crops bring parnosa. Parnosa allows a person to give tzedakah, to support Torah, to keep Shabbos properly, to educate their children. The reward for doing a mitzvah is the ability to do more mitzvahs. Schar, mitzvah, mitzvah. A person who's on the move spiritually, who is a mahalech, will find the road rising to meet them. It's a cycle, not of transaction, but of transformation. Amazing. So what do we learn from all this? That the land of Israel is not passive. It reflects the soul of its people. That mitzvahs don't just affect the next world, they transform this one. That even thinking about growing spiritually creates movement. That blessings are not payouts, they're invitations to do more. And that we don't have to be perfect to change the world. We just have to start walking. And when we walk in his statutes, the land walks with us. If you keep reading Parshat Bechukotai after those initial psukim, the tone changes abruptly and dramatically. The warm language of blessing, abundance, and security gives way to a chilling monologue of consequences. It's traditionally called the teichacha, the rebuke, and it's truly hard to read. Suddenly the Torah speaks of terror, disease, drought, hunger, war, siege, exile. One after another, the verses descend into darker and darker images. The land that once responded to mitzvahs with fruit and flowers now gives way to fear and futility. Instead of v'nosna haaretz yevula, it becomes v'ashimoisi ani es haaretz. I will make the land desolate. You'll plant, and your enemies will eat. You'll run, even when no one's chasing you. You'll be scattered among the nations, helpless and landless. The Tochacha is relentless. And naturally, it raises the question, why would Hashem speak to us like this? Why would a loving God use such frightening language? Is this divine anger? Divine vengeance? Divine abandonment? Well, that's one way to read it, but it's not the Jewish way. Let's start with the Malbim, whose commentary on the Tochacha is like a surgeon's scalpel. He doesn't merely read the verses, he literally dissects them. He points out that the rebuke is structured in escalating waves, each introduced with a phrase like Ve'im lo tishma'u li, and if you still do not listen to me. According to the Malbim, this repetition is the key. The punishment is not a single angry outburst. It's a process. It's measured. It's deliberate. And its goal is always the same, to bring us back. Each stage of suffering is designed to awaken us. First come the subtle reminders. Then the stronger warnings emerge. Then unbearable pressure. And if all else fails, exile. But even exile isn't the end. It is the beginning of a long path back to where it all began. The Malbim insists that Hashem never punishes out of rage or disappointment. He disciplines us out of hope. The hope that we will stop ignoring him. The hope that we will remember who we are. The hope that we'll stop running in circles and start walking in his ways again. In other words, the Tochacha isn't vengeance, it's stubborn love. The Ramban sees it similarly. In fact, he says something even more striking. After all the horrors and darkness described in the Tochacha, the Torah ends the section with a whisper. V'af gam zois b'yoisem be'eretz oyevehem, lo ma'astim v'lo ge'altim l'chaloisam, ki ani Hashem Elokeichem. Even so, even when they are in the land of their enemies, I have not rejected them, nor have I detested them in order to destroy them, for I am Hashem your God. The Ramban also sees us on this pasuk. After everything, after the suffering, after the devastation, after the national humiliation, Hashem still says, I've not rejected you, I've not abandoned you, I am still your God. There is no greater expression of commitment than that. The consequences of our relationship breakdown with God are terrifying, yes, but they are not the end of the story. They're not even the punishment of a failed relationship. They are the proof that the relationship can never fail. Hashem disciplines his people precisely because he refuses to let them go. He clings onto them. That's why the Torah doesn't call this section klalot, klalos, curses. It is called tochacha, rebuke. And rebuke comes from someone who still cares. A stranger doesn't rebuke you. A distant acquaintance lets you make your mistakes and walks away. But a parent, a teacher, a spouse, a God, they rebuke you because they're still in the story. Rav Hirsch takes this idea and gives it a kind of psychological depth. He writes that the Tochacha isn't a series of punishments. It's a form of education. This is divine chinuch. The stages of suffering described in the Parsha are not about breaking us. They are about building our awareness, stage by stage, realization by realization. Rav Hirsch writes that when people drift away from truth and decency, they don't usually wake up when they hear a lecture. They wake up when the consequences of their decisions start to hurt, when they feel the damage they've caused themselves. Hashem doesn't throw consequences at us arbitrarily. He introduces them gradually, each one slightly more intense than the last one, like a rising siren, until finally the person or the nation says, I get it. I've gone the wrong way. I'm coming back. Rav Hirsch compares it to a doctor. If a doctor gives you a painful treatment, is it because he hates you? Of course not. It's because he wants to heal you. The pain is a tool, and the more advanced the disease, the more extreme the treatment. The Tochacha is not Hashem giving up on us. It's Hashem refusing to give up on us. It's also worth pointing out something that Rav Hirsch emphasizes in his commentary elsewhere, that the most frightening phrase in all of Tanakh is not a curse, it's silence. The real danger isn't when Hashem rebukes us. The real danger is when he stops speaking to us altogether. The Tochacha, for all its thunder and dread, is still a conversation. It's Hashem saying, I still expect something from you. I'm still here. You still matter to me. In that sense, the Tochacha is not the closing of a door. It's the pounding on the door that we've locked from the inside. Hashem is still knocking. And that's why the Torah ends the section the way it does, not with despair, but with memory. Zocharti es brisi Yaakov, v'af es brisi Yitzchak, v'af es brisi Avram ezkor, v'ha'aretz ezkor. Hashem says, I will remember the covenant, not just with the forefathers, but with the land itself. Even if you forget me, I will never forget you. And even if you lose your connection to the land, I will remember that connection, because the land, like the covenant, is not just background, it is a partner in the relationship. It waits, it remembers, and it holds the promise until we are ready to return. You have to agree that this is a remarkable theological move. The Torah doesn't try to soften the consequences. It lays them out in all their awful detail. But then it says, even so, even then, even there, I am still your God. I'm here for you. And the land is waiting for you. Although, for nearly 2,000 years, these verses in Parshat Bechukotai felt like echoes from a distant reality. The blessings, the promises, the sentiments, they felt abstract, poetic, hopeful, someday maybe sort of things. To be fair, the curses felt much more familiar. We lived through exile. We lived through persecution. We endured a terrible, painful exile. And more than anything else, we lived through absence. The absence of land, of sovereignty, of security, of control. And so the Tochacha, the long, painful list of consequences for abandoning our covenant, was always read through the lens of the past. It was about them, those people back then, the generation that lost the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, the generation exiled from their land, the generation that forgot and paid the price. But that all changed a few short decades ago. Today we're back in the land. Not any land, we are back in that land. And it literally changes everything. It used to be that when we read Bechukotai and said, what a tragedy it was for them, and hopefully one day the blessings at the beginning will come true, it was about them. It wasn't about us. But now, when we read it, we realize, hey, this is about us. We're no longer passive students of Jewish history. We're active participants in it. We live in a world where the Jewish people have returned to their homeland. We live in a moment that previous generations couldn't even dream of. We are the generation that has Yerushalayim. We have Hebron, we have Beersheba, we have Tveria, we have Tzfas. We are the generation with soldiers, with farmers, with high-tech innovators, and yeshiva bachrim learning Torah day and night, all under the same sky, the sky that is over Eretz Yisrael. We are the generation that prays and builds and weeps and celebrates in our promised land, in Eretz Yisrael. And that means that the spiritual rules of the Bechukotai, once suspended and in exile, are now back in play. We're no longer sheltered, as it were, by Golus. In exile, maybe you could sin and blame it on the nations around you. In exile, when things went wrong, it was because we were hated, we were oppressed, we were powerless. But now, in Eretz Yisrael, all the excuses fall away. The land is ours. The society is ours. The fate of the Jewish people, at least in this moment, rests in Jewish hands. And to be clear, the land is watching, which makes this generation's test so intense and so unique, because never before in recent Jewish history has the covenant of Bechukotai been more real, more immediate, and more present. We have the opportunity to see the blessings unfold real, tangible blessings, but we also run the risk of seeing the warnings come to life in ways our ancestors in Golas never could. This is exactly what the Meshech Chochmah warned us about over 100 years ago, in a comment that feels almost too prophetic for comfort. Rav Meir Simcha of Dvinsk wrote the following commenting on this very parsha. Vayidame ha'adam ki Berlin hi Yerushalayim os tifroitz hashor haruchanis v'hagufanis b'Europa v'yizbareh lakol she'efes eitza v'toshia b'goyla. When the Jew begins to believe that Berlin is Jerusalem, he said, when Jews begin to confuse exile with redemption, when they start thinking they've arrived, that they're safe, that the host culture is home, then spiritual and physical destruction will follow, and it will become clear to all that there's no lasting solution, no true security in the exile. It's a terrifying line, but also an awakening one, because now, guess what? We're not in Berlin anymore. We're in Beit Shemesh and Beit El. We're in Ashdod. We're in Afula. We don't have to pretend. We don't have to fantasize. We're not guests anymore. We're home. And that means the land is no longer a bystander. It's in the covenant with us, which is exhilarating. And it's also terrifying, because now it's our decisions as a people and as a society that determine whether the blessings of the Nosna Haaretz Yevula will be ours. It's our moral fiber, our national priorities, our spiritual depth or lack thereof, that will determine whether the Afgam Zois becomes our only lifeline. Think about it. For generations, Jewish communities were powerless to change the political or social conditions around them. Jews in Eastern Europe could barely scrape together parnassa, let alone national cohesion. Jews in North Africa or Syria were tolerated at best and hunted down and persecuted at worst. In the Russian Empire, a Jew's life was as precarious as it was possible to be. And even in more modern Western Europe, Jews had to play by someone else's rules, and when those rules were thrown out of the window, we all know what happened. But now, for the first time in 2,000 years, we have a country where the rules, technically, are ours. Sadly, we're struggling to define what those rules should be. Should it be a Jewish state or a state for the Jews? A modern democratic state or a state run on Jewish lines, or perhaps some kind of hybrid? And if it's a hybrid, how can that be worked out so that we are a light unto all the other nations? These are not theoretical questions. They're real questions, and they're covenantal questions, because the Torah isn't only about the temple service and Shabbat and kosher. The Torah cares about how we treat the land and how we treat each other. When the Torah promises rain in its season, it's not about meteorology, it's about alignment. And when it warns of fear, collapse and exile, it's not about geography, it's about identity. That's why this parsha feels so unnervingly contemporary, because we're not reading about someone else's story, we're living the story. We are the test case. We are the experiment. We are the generation that will prove or fail to prove whether the Torah's vision of national life in the land is still possible, whether a society built on mitzvahs, on justice, on compassion and faith can flourish in the modern world, whether the land can once again respond to a people that remembers who they are. That's not an abstract responsibility. It's a daily responsibility for all of us, because the land of Israel doesn't exist in soil and borders, it lives in our choices. And like we said at the beginning of this shir, it reflects us. It rises when we rise, and it recoils when we fall. Thankfully, the parsha doesn't end with curses, it ends with a promise. Lo me'astim v'lo ge'altim l'chaloisam. Even in the lowest moment, Hashem says, I have not rejected you. I have not abandoned you. I'm still your God, which means as long as we are still in the land, as long as the covenant is still open, as long as the Torah still speaks, there's a way forward. In the early decades of the 20th century, long before the State of Israel was founded, one man walked the streets of Eretz Yisrael with fire in his heart and tears in his eyes. And that man was Rav Kook, Kook, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. To some, he was a mystery. To others, he was a prophet. To all, he was a figure who could see redemption blooming in the soil, even when no one else could. Rav Kook had a perspective on Bechukotai that was unlike anyone else's. While others saw the Teichacha as a looming threat, Rav Kook saw something else entirely. He saw that even those who were not Torah observant, the early pioneers, the secular Zionists, the builders of the land, were, in their own way, fulfilling a sacred mission. Their ahava, their love for Eretz Yisrael, their willingness to sacrifice, to dig, to plant, to protect, to settle, was in Rav Kook's eyes an act of teshuvah in motion, a mitzvah in boots, in shovels, and in soil. Rav Kook believed deeply that this passionate love for the land would always be viewed with favor by God, that even if the full covenant was not yet embraced in halachic terms, the very return to the land, the yearning for its rebirth, would soften the sharpness of the Teichacha, that the land itself, so long neglected, would respond with unexpected mercy to those who came home, even if they had not yet remembered the full terms of the covenant. Rav Kook once said, Ahava sheyesh belev Yehudi le'Eretz Yisrael hi kama ketores. Afilu keshehi mu'ureves b'chet hi oila lifnei kisei hakovod. The love a Jew has for the land of Israel is like incense. Even when it's mixed with sin, it rises up to the heavenly throne. This wasn't naiveness. It was vision. Rav Kook saw beyond the present. He believed that Klal Yisrael's return to the land, religious and secular alike, was not a violation of the covenant, but the beginning of its reawakening. And here's something most people don't know. When the Chazon Ish arrived in Eretz Yisrael in 1933, the very first person he went to see was Rav Kook. He didn't agree with all of Rav Kook's positions, but he respected him deeply. And it wasn't a personal initiative. It was at the instruction of Reb Chaim Ozer Grudzinski, the universally recognized Gadol Hador in Lithuania. Reb Chaim Ozer told the Chazon Ish, in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Kook is the address. He is the man who sees the full picture. Even those who disagreed with Rav Kook's optimism recognized that his understanding of Bechukotai, of national failure and divine mercy, of sin and redemption, of rebuke and return, was rooted in a depth of love that few could match. Rav Kook believed that God, who rebukes his children out of love, would not ignore the deepest expression of that love, the Jewish people returning to his land. So when we talk about the Teichacha, we have to remember, it's not a forecast of doom, it's a plea for meaning. It's a call to return. And sometimes that return begins not in the pages of a sefer, but in the dirt of the land, in a shovel, a fence post, a sapling, and a soldier's gun. And that brings us to one final story, one that echoes Rav Kook's vision, but lands with the quiet thunder of spiritual clarity. In the early 1950s, not long after the State of Israel was declared, there was a minor earthquake near Bnei Brak. Nothing major, a tremor, some rattling, a bit of panic. People poured into the streets. Everyone was shaken, not by what had happened, but by what it might mean. Someone ran to the Chazon Ish to ask, Rebbe, was that a sign? Is Hashem warning us? Should we say Tehillim? Should we fast? The Chazon Ish paused, and then, with his signature calm and precision, he said, when a child runs too far from his father, the father sometimes shakes the ground to get his child's attention, to remind him where he is and to remind him where home is. And then he added, almost in a whisper, but remember, a father only shakes the ground when he still cares what the child does next. That's what Parshat Bechukotai is really telling us. The land of Israel is not just dirt and rock and olive trees. It's a covenantal barometer. It reflects us, it responds to us, and most importantly, it loves us back. And even when we fail, even when we fall short, even when we stray, the ground beneath our feet shakes, not in fury, but in love. So let it shake us awake. Let it bring us home. Let it remind us that the covenant is still open, that the path is still before us, and that the blessings are still waiting to be unlocked by our mitzvahs, by our yearning, and even by our simple love for the land. Because that love, even in imperfection, still rises to the Kiseh HaKavod. I think we'll leave it here for today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. Thank you.